Hi everybody. So we're going to get started with our final um, review of the second part of the assignment this week where you were adding in the shading. And the process that we took for this week is really essentially the same, pretty much the same process that we're going to be following in the final week and a half that starts this coming Monday. The only two differences are that you're going to be able to set up your own perspective, instead of using a template. You're going to just set up your own interior drawing. But then you're going to be following the same process of starting with a line drawing. Um, but then we'll have two phases after creating, oh, I'm sorry. So we're going to start with some thumbnails, exploring different parts of the perspective, and then different possible points of view. Then we'll be choosing one of those, creating a line drawing like you did in this assignment, the previous assignment this week, and then you're going to be adding the shading in the final one. So three different parts, but again, essentially the same kind of process. And I'd really encourage you to, kind of like use everything that you have learned in class, but don't necessarily make it overly, like don't sort of aim too far. If you have gotten really comfortable with like working with basic geometric shapes and building from that, keep doing that. You can always add in like details with those. So kind of build within what you have learned in class. And if you feel a little more confident, of course, you can tackle something a little bit more, a little bit more challenging, but otherwise I would just say, keep it simple. Um, Okay, and so I wanted to show these thumbnails here before we get looking at them individually, because you can actually start seeing just from the thumbnail how the adding the shading in starts building in that dimensional look, like where things start looking more three-dimensional with the shading. And I find that when you look on the little thumbnails, you actually start to get a sense of that, how it works. So, when you're drawing, you can always step back from your drawing as you're drawing, you're spending some time drawing, and then kind of step back from your drawing, see how it's looking, come back in, do a, kind of build on layers. Like I think our video tutorials and the instructions do a really good job at showing how to, build on layers, where maybe you do a first round of shading, you come back in, you add another level of shading. So you kind of build, so you really get those nice sort of richer dark colors which start to make things pop. Okay, let's get started now. Hey, Alejandro, yeah, I think that this is looking quite good. Let me just, if you don't have Photoshop, and I'm assuming that the folks who aren't color adjusting, like adjusting the photographs, maybe because you don't have Photoshop, that's what's preventing you from doing that. You just don't want to say. And there are alternatives to Photoshop. You can use a program called GIMP, G-I-M-P, or Inkscape. You can do all the same things. They're very easy to work in. You can just bring your drawing in. And in your case, for example, I would make sure to change this to black and white. It becomes so much more important as we started adding, the shadows, because I really think you start seeing all the work you've done. Can you see how much better this looks now? So, if you need some help with that, let me know. But otherwise, I would make sure to do this. Yeah, so overall, I think you've got a good handle on, you've got your, so with your shading down here, this is going to remain white. This actually doesn't have any, um, you don't tone this one at all. It's the white of your paper. Then we go down to the darkest color here. So this, you probably want to go even a little darker, like fill this right in, make it almost black. And so this is the widest range. You want to have, our lectures talked about, I think, and the assignment instructions talk about how 10% of the page should be, or your composition should be white, and 10% black, and everything else is gray. So you can use that kind of as a rule of thumb, that you want to keep about 10% of your drawing white and 10% will be black or very dark. Now this changes if you have a really dimly lit room, for example, with a lot of you know, just a lot of shadow, of course you can change that, but it gives you kind of an idea that you want to go with that whole range. So I would say you want to go a little darker here and make sure that you're keeping some white of the paper as well, you know, wherever you think that there's going to be highlights. So this is your light source here, right here, and I think that so some things to work on is to make sure that you move away from lines. Can you see, and let me just zoom in a little bit more, this little area in here starting to work pretty well because you're moving away from lines as defining those edges to it being light, a lighter area against a darker area. So you want, you know, pretty much everything in your drawing to move as much as you can. You know, sometimes you can't get everything, but as much as you can to move away from lines defining edges to shapes of light and dark. Like your character, the guy here, I think this looks really good. What you did here is actually starting to do that, starting to move to being areas of light and dark. And I think your cast shadows are looking really good too. So you want to keep working on that. You want to keep working on the walls as well. You know, they shouldn't be exactly everything you've got here is the same value on your walls and your ceiling, and that wouldn't be the case in real life. How can you, and sometimes I think on the walls and the ceiling, this is where it really can help to just be in a room, wherever you are, close, you know, close all the light sources like the windows and the doors so that you don't have any light coming in, and just have a light, like just, you know, kind of you can just have a lamp somewhere and see what happens to the walls, you know, kind of simulate the same situation so you don't have to imagine it. That's what I would do here. And sort of figure out where, you know, it's probably going to be a little lighter here, you know, compared to everything else because it's closest to the light source. But what's going to happen on this wall? What's going to happen on the ceiling? That's something you can experiment with. Okay, and let's see. So you're going to have a shadow as well. So here's your light source. You're also going to have a shadow that's probably going to fill this area in here from this little bench. So how do we do that? So this is coming out here. This is where, let me just make this a little smaller. This is where, what do we need to do here? We need to kind of build our box to kind of figure out, well, let's just see if we can do it this way. This here. So I'm just kind of finding the guideline in here. And let's see, the vanishing point. So this is where, so it's somewhere right here, right? Okay, so I don't know if I got that quite right, but somewhere in here is where this back one is. And now we just use our guide here to help us find where this is going to be right here. So that means that this is going to join up here. You see that? So this is, your shadow is going to be filled in right here, in this little area here, connected. Okay, that'll make it look, that'll make it look more realistic, I think. I think this shadow is looking really good. When you're creating shadows, any shading and shadows, review, there's a super helpful, let's see if we can find it because I'm sure I'll be probably recommending other folks look at it too. Let's go to our learning path and go to, am I in the right one here? Yeah. Lights and shadows, shading techniques. Shading basic shapes, shading techniques. Both of these particular pages talk about how to work with different types of shading. So here's some toning, hatching, cross-hatching, scribbling, stippling. All of these are good techniques to employ, you know, and you can also employ them in the same drawing. So I'd review that. The main thing is you want to make sure that they're nice and sort of small and even. Because if you just kind of like sort of do this, like da, 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 side to side, it doesn't create a dimension. It doesn't create a dimension. Like it kind of lifts it. It doesn't create a sense of solidity in the you know, because the floor doesn't look flat anymore. I think you're starting to do a better job in here. But you know, when you're doing this, like just kind of doing this along the walls, that doesn't make it flat. that makes it kind of look sort of like it's not, it doesn't have a dimension. So and you're at a perfect stage here. You can just go over what you've done and just keep filling it in, kind of blending it in, keep working on it. Okay, so I think the shadow from your guy is fine. You could probably, you know, so he's going to be, that's going to be a really big shadow here. Let's see, so it's going to come here. Yeah, so it's going to kind of extend pretty far because, so yeah, it's going to go, oh yeah, where you've got it is good. I just might maybe thicken it up a little bit as it gets like, maybe as his torso, you kind of have to imagine that a little bit. It might get a little thicker here. You know, cast shadows, especially when you're working with more sort of complex shapes, they don't have to be necessarily perfect. You can sort of just imagine them, like kind of visualize how that might change. Okay, so those are the main points here, is keep working on your shading, move from line work to shapes, you know, to kind of remove your outlines, keep working on just playing more with it. Hey, Michelle, you know, I have the same thing that happens to me, is that I don't like to go too dark. And I think I've got this sort of, or I don't know if maybe I've broken through that, but certainly, you know, in my early days, I just was hesitant to go dark. But you really have to in order to create a dimensional scene. So I would go back here, right here, into this scale and work on this first. Keep this light. I like the way you've made it nice and gradual, but this should be pretty much black. This last one, almost black, you know? And then what you're going to do is make sure that about 10% of your drawing is this black color. 10% is going to be white, and everything else is going to be in between. So you just want to keep going over this, you know, finding the darkest places, and, you know, everything in between is going to be, you know, gray. Okay. So that's what you just need to keep working on here, is working on that, and make sure that you've got, just like I mentioned to Alejandro, your ceilings and your walls are going to be toned in different ways. Everything's going to move from being an outline to a shade. Like it's starting to work in here. Can you see that, where you're moving just a bit away from the line, but you can keep going here a little further. So keep working on it. Yeah, that's what you need to do. And I know it's a little scary to do that, but just, you know, we're just practicing here. So you just want to really kind of work on it as much as you can. I like your technique, whatever you're doing here, that's sort of got a kind of a watery kind of color, smudgy kind of look to it, which I think is really pretty, very subtle. So just keep doing what you're doing here. Your looks like your guy is going to be a little, this is your light source. It's going to be, here's the line from the bottom of the feet. So you want to put this in as well. This is going to be a long shadow, you know, going in this direction. Okay, so just keep going. Angela, yeah, you know that I'm thank you for mentioning that, longer strokes. You know, again, there are certain types. I always keep saying this. You know, there are other types of drawing styles where longer strokes are just exactly what, you know, exactly what you want to have. You know, especially like gesture drawings and really quick studies. You know, all kinds of drawing. Whereas in perspective, it really you know, you can have the longer strokes, but it really depends upon the type of perspective drawing you're doing. For the style we're doing, the smaller pencil strokes are what is going to give us that solidity, because it's going to make everything look flat. When you have the longer strokes, as we've been talking about, you know, the directional longer strokes, then things start to not look very solid. You know, it's moving away from realism. Whereas the smaller strokes, let's look at your drawing here. Hold on. Whereas the smaller strokes are what takes you to making things start looking real. Okay, yeah, this looks good. Very nice. I love what you did right up here. So folks, if you're trying to think about how does a room look, the walls and the ceiling, I think that Angela is starting to really move in the direction you want to be going in, where you're starting to try to figure out where the light hits. And Angela, I'm not sure how you did this, whether you just sort of you kind of visualized it, which is one way to do it, where you sort of imagine your light source being here and how it would light up this section of the room. And as we move further away, it would get darker and darker and into these kind of this corner here. That's a good way of doing it. So it's a good way, method to follow. Again, or you can sort of start using your real life situation, the rooms that you are drawing in, to help you with that. This shadow looks really good here. Very realistic. We can really start seeing that kind of sense of space between the character and the wall. And that's really what shadows do. Why do they add realism? Because they tell us where things are in relation to other things in the room. Like now we get the sense, oh, this guy is standing a couple feet away from the wall, because that shadow is kind of cueing us, that sense of the shadow. So I would just say, keep going just a little bit more here with your shading. This table looks really, can you see how the table actually really stands out in the sense that it's just shadow, value and shadow, there's no lines anymore here. So I would just maybe move this element a little closer to that, like sort of remove. Sometimes what you can do, if you feel like a line is too dark for you to actually remove, kind of remove it with the shading, like that it'll disappear with the shading. Sometimes what you can do is take a kneaded eraser and kind of lift up a little bit of that line. A kneaded eraser, because you press it onto you can kind of press it onto the drawing rather than erasing with a regular eraser, which it doesn't leave a nice look to it. Whereas that pressing sometimes will just lift up what you need. So you could try that, or you can just keep shading, this guy to kind of make it a little bit less obvious that there's lines there. And I think that's good. I might do a little bit more with your cast shadow, like with, well, I can't remember now. Where was that cast shadow? It was, actually, it was pretty close to the sofa, wasn't it? Let's see. I don't remember now. Oh yeah, I remember now. Yeah, so maybe just kind of plotting that out. It looks like a little bit ambiguous now what's happening with that. So I might work just a bit more on that, like trying to figure out where that shadow is going to be cast there. Or just kind of, it's a difficult one because if I remember correctly, we actually cast this in the group critique and it's so close against there. So maybe it just needs a little bit more of a transition between this and here. So do whatever you can with that. It is a little bit of a difficult area in there. Okay, I think that's it. I think everything else looks really, really good in your drawing, and I think it's really coming along nicely. Hi, Amy. Yeah, cross-hatching does take a little bit of time to work with, and so something that I think is good is just kind of picking a scrap piece of paper up and just practicing on that until you start feeling a little more comfortable. I think you're getting a good handle on it. Like, so your scale here looks really good here, from light to dark. Let me just, yeah, I think it looks very good, and I think you're getting a good sense of cross-hatching, whatever you're doing here. And here, maybe it's getting a little bit too busy. And so cross-hatching, you kind of have to join things up and really go slow. So you'd probably want to go, like, in a way, a little more. You can also kind of, just kind of a little tighter, a little less. You want to sort of block out some of the white bits that you see in the cross-hatching, because that gives it more of the patterned look. So going a little slower, sometimes you can actually combine different techniques like cross-hatching along with just kind of sort of some gentle sort of soft shading, or even blending, like where you take, and rub it a little bit with a tissue to blend it in a little bit. I would just keep doing that a little bit more. I noticed it especially right here on this wall. Just keep working on it. But otherwise, I like the kind of way you've been working with your, going a little darker as we move further away from the light source. I think that's really good. I think that's working well. You've got some nice darks in here, that I think are exactly what you want here. You want to get darker in places. So I would just keep working on blending your shading. I think that's all you really, the most important thing that you really need to do here is to just blend. I like how you're starting to move away from having outlines around things into just having, these transitions here between light and dark. It's a little bit harder when you have flat, like these types of surfaces where okay, so like where you've got a line that defines where these doors close. So some ways that you can kind of work with that, let's just zoom in a little bit, so what you can do actually is, let me see if I can get a Photoshop tool that might mimic a drawing tool. Hold on. What you can kind of do here is, instead of making it like a solid line that goes straight down, you can kind of do what might happen naturally, which is that you might have some areas that perhaps are a little darker, and a little bit areas a little lighter. Like sometimes when you get close to edges, you get sort of a little darker area. So you can kind of maybe erase or darken places, sort of to soften, to kind of make it a little more uneven. That would look more natural, Oh, I love what you did with the sink in here. That's a beautiful transition in here. Very realistic here. So you can kind of do that. You could kind of maybe take and make these into little more handles, so you could give them a little dimension, these areas in here, just to make it look, take it in and make it a little more, three-dimensional, just kind of going through and working on all the different details. So that's what I'd work on. But I think, it's really, oh, see, this is a beautiful detail in here. It looks like the ice dispenser. It looks very realistic, because it's gone from line work to being shade and shadow. Okay, so I would just keep playing with it. Ashley, yes, I love what you said here, that adding a little bit of shading and texture makes the space pop. Yeah, it's true. And difficult to know what to shade. As I went along, I was able to step back and look at what needed to be a bit darker and what needed to, yeah, that's very, I think what you've said here is really getting at how you really should like kind of layer your shading. You add a little bit, you go back, you add more, and you see how the relationships between everything works. Because you'll find that when you darken something, you want to darken something else, and it's a very much of about all of the different relationships between your objects here. So photoshopping your drawing, you can see, will really make a big difference here. Okay, good. So your scale looks really good here, I think. Hold on a second here. Remember, did I look at your drawing? Hold on a second. Okay. Oh, I see. So it looks like, yeah, this is the first time I'm seeing this. So, okay, so let's just take a look first at the composition and sort of take a look at what you're doing. I like what you've done here with this doorway. That's really a nice touch. It kind of opens up the space. And it looks like you've got maybe some kind of cube here, a table, and 2 lamps. You might want to add a few more elements in here, just some simple things, like you could add some just very simple geometric shapes in here, like cubes. That could be little benches that you scatter. It'll just make your composition kind of come to life a little bit more. With your character here, I would, you want to make it a little more dimensional. Like I like the head, maybe like the body could be a little bit more just like, a little sausage body, just to make it less stick-like and more like a figure. You don't have any more, you don't need any more details at all on your figure. And I think if you just look at some of the other examples that people have used, as well as the assignment video, the tutorials, you'll get an idea of what you should have there. But I think a little bit more would be nice. For your ellipse, make sure that you're really inscribing that ellipse so that you get a correct ellipse. And again, the videos and tutorials will help you do that with the learning activities. With your cast shadows, so I would probably recommend taking this element out here and then maybe, you know, doing some other things in your design, just because I think that maybe it's a little bit, I don't know if it really quite belongs right here. It seems like it's like duplicating this lamp right here. And if you do that, I think it'll also make it easier to work on this shadow, which I think you've done a good job here starting out with the shadow, which is, yes, it will definitely kind of go in this direction, but where does it end? You know, where is this going to end? Well, we need to cast, um, first of all, here. So this is the point where it's going to end, and now it's going to go in a new direction here. So what direction would that be? Well, we're going to have to cast this element right here down, you know, this guy right here, and then it's going to come down. It's actually a pretty long shadow. Somehow it's going to join up all the way over here. You can sort of have it kind of fade out towards this part, and then you would cast this guy back here too, you know, this one right here. So that point right in here, I don't know if I've quite got that line going up to the vanishing point quite correct, but let me just see if I can get that a little bit better. So this is going to, yeah, well, it's going to be pretty much like that, yeah. So that is going to be your last final point here, going in that direction, and then down through that top here. So it kind of would be sort of filling this whole space in here, really. So I would just kind of spend a little time you know, it's a lot easier to cast shadows just on a blank piece of paper, so until you feel comfortable with it. So I'd spend a little time doing that, and just practicing. And then just going through here, and you know, this back wall, I'm a little, I'd probably recommend not just sort of like solidly filling in an area being so dark, because it's a little hard to tell what it is, you know. So maybe just kind of make it just a wall, like a regular wall. Maybe this was intended to be a window going through. Anyhow, so if I were doing this, I would probably want to just actually start again with this. You know, you've got some changes. I'm recommending doing a lot of changes, and I just think it's more about practicing. So I'd really like you to practice the ellipse more, the cast shadow. I'd like you to experiment with a different composition, you know, maybe with more elements in it, you know, so that you could play around with your cast shadows a little bit more, and then starting your shading and working on that a little bit more. So I might try doing that, because just remember, keep in mind that this particular drawing is our preparation for the next drawing. And the more you get out of it, the more you'll find that starting next week, the final drawing will just be so much more of a flow, and it will be just more relaxing to work on. So that's what I'd work on here too. Just keep playing with it. Okay, Rhonda, let's see here. So this actually looks like, so you went from the 2-point perspective of the previous assignment to 1-point perspective. It's fine if you want to do that and make a change. So, but we're going to start then talking a little bit about your, you know, composition just a little bit before we get into the shading, because you have a new drawing here. So let's see here. So yeah, so you've got a sofa and a rug. You've got your light source here, some works of art on the wall, which is always nice to do. So that's, I think, working well. I think your sofa, what I would work on a little bit with your sofa is a few more of the details of your sofa. So it's always good to kind of block it in first, which I think is what you started to do here. So here's where it is back here. And this is the front here. So this line in here, so I would probably start by taking this line out and just building the front of your sofa. It can really be helpful here. Like, so let's start with some cushions here at the front, you know, like just, so maybe this is the bottom and here are the cushions. And it can really help, I think, to look at a sofa online, nice geometric sofa, and really, figure out what you're doing with the style of it. I'd recommend something really simple. So I'd probably just rebuild this because it looks like, you ran into some issues with it. Maybe, take off these, pillows on top and just, maybe even just make it like just a very simple modern sofa without a lot of puffy kind of curves on it, which I think are hard to draw. Or a bench, if you want to just work with a bench instead of a sofa, that's fine with me. It doesn't have to be like a sofa at all. So I'd keep playing with that one. I'm just kind of going back to what you did here with the previous drawing. Let's see if I can rotate this one a little bit so that we can look at it. And this drawing I think is so much stronger. I'm not quite sure why you changed, because this is actually working pretty well. The only thing that I think you needed to do here was work on the cast shadows, but it's a really pretty nice drawing. So if you maybe want to email me or put a comment in about what happened, maybe sometimes drawings get ruined or things like that. But if you can, I would actually just redo this if you don't have this drawing anymore and shade this in, because I think this is working so much better. Like your perspective looks really good. You've got a really nice composition. I think it's working. So why don't you do that? And then just, maybe this could be like a draft that you think about for something else, because we've got to also work on our cast shadows here because I think they are not quite working yet. And then adding more shading. There's really a lot more work to be done on this one. So I think if you work on this one, all you need to do is use the video tutorial for casting your shadows and then start writing on your shading. All right, so that's what I'd recommend doing. Let me know if you have any questions, but I really hope that you go in this direction because I think it's going to be a really nice drawing if you do that.